20 of England's finest physicians had declared the case hopeless. The Duke's only son lay dying, his fever raging for 7 endless days, while the greatest medical minds in the realm stood powerless. Then a housemaid, barely 20 years old, stepped forward with a remedy so simple it seemed absurd. Within 60 seconds, the heir's eyes opened. The doctors stood speechless. The Duke's world would never be the same. What happened next would shake the very foundations of their society. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has travelled. Beatrice Ashford had scrubbed the marble floors of Thornfield Manor for 3 years, her hands perpetually raw from lye soap and cold water. She moved through the grand estate like a shadow, invisible to the family she served, yet intimately acquainted with every corner of their opulent world. The Duke of Thornfield's household operated with military precision, and Beatrice had learned early that a maid's survival depended upon absolute silence and flawless execution of duty. The manor itself was a monument to aristocratic power, its Georgian architecture commanding the Hampshire countryside with imperious grace. 42 rooms sprawled across 3 floors, each more lavishly appointed than the last. Beatrice's domain was the servants' wing and the lesser-used chambers, though occasionally she was summoned to assist in the family quarters when additional hands were needed. She had glimpsed the Duke only from a distance, a tall figure with silver-threaded hair and an expression of perpetual authority. His wife, the Duchess, was a woman of legendary beauty and equally legendary coldness, her displeasure capable of ending a servant's employment with a single glance. But it was their son, Lord William Thornfield, who occupied the household's collective attention. At 24, he was everything an heir should be. Handsome, educated at Oxford, destined to inherit not only the dukedom, but also vast holdings across 3 counties. Beatrice had seen him occasionally during her duties, always impeccably dressed, moving through the halls with the unconscious confidence of one born to command. He was engaged to Lady Charlotte Pemberton, daughter of the Earl of Westshire, a match celebrated in every drawing room from London to Edinburgh. Their wedding, planned for the autumn of 1887, was to be the social event of the season. Beatrice's own life existed in stark contrast to such grandeur. She rose at 4 each morning, lit fires, carried water, scrubbed, polished, and served until she collapsed into her narrow bed in the attic long after dark. Her wages, £12 annually, supported her widowed mother and younger brother in a cramped cottage 5 miles distant. She had no prospects beyond service, no expectations of anything more than the endless cycle of labour that defined her class. Her beauty, though considerable with her dark auburn hair and intelligent grey eyes, was irrelevant in her position. Maids were meant to be invisible, and Beatrice had perfected the art of disappearing into the woodwork. The household's routine was disrupted one humid August morning when Lord William failed to appear for breakfast. The Duchess's sharp inquiry sent the butler, Mr. Pemberton, to investigate. He returned with troubling news. The young lord was abed with a fever. By afternoon, the family physician, Dr. Hartwell, had been summoned from the village. By evening, a specialist had arrived from London. By the following dawn, Lord William's condition had deteriorated alarmingly, and the Duke's face had taken on a greyish pallor that frightened even the most senior servants. Beatrice learned of the crisis through the whispered conversations in the servants' hall. Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper, reported that the fever showed no signs of breaking, that the young lord was delirious, that the doctors were baffled. Additional physicians were summoned, each more distinguished than the last. They arrived with their leather bags and grave expressions, ascending the grand staircase to the sick room while the household held its collective breath. Days blurred together. The normal rhythm of the manor dissolved into anxious waiting. Beatrice continued her duties, but the atmosphere had changed. Footmen spoke in hushed tones. The Duchess emerged from her son's chamber with red-rimmed eyes. The Duke paced the library at all hours, his usual composure cracking under the weight of helplessness. Lady Charlotte arrived from her family's estate, her beautiful face drawn with worry, though Beatrice noticed she spent more time in the drawing-room than at her fiancé's bedside. By the 7th day, 20 physicians had examined Lord William. They conferred in the Duke's study, their voices carrying through the door in fragments of Latin terminology and defeated admissions. Beatrice, polishing the hallway sconces nearby, heard one doctor say clearly, "There is nothing more to be done. We must prepare the family." The words struck her like a physical blow, though she barely knew the young lord. Death was coming to Thornfield Manor, and all the wealth and power in England could not stop it. That evening, as Beatrice emptied the slop buckets from the sick-room floor, she caught a glimpse through the partially open door. Lord William lay motionless in the massive 4-poster bed, his face flushed and glistening with fever sweat, his breathing laboured and irregular. The Duchess sat beside him, holding his hand, her aristocratic composure finally shattered. The Duke stood at the window, his back rigid, staring out at the manicured gardens, as if willing the world to make sense again. The scene burned itself into Beatrice's memory, a family with everything, facing the one thing their privilege could not purchase. She descended to the kitchens, her mind churning. The other servants were gathered around the long wooden table, their faces reflecting the household's grief. Cook was weeping openly. The footman looked lost. Even Mr. Pemberton, usually the embodiment of professional detachment, seemed diminished. Beatrice set down her bucket and stood in the doorway, a strange certainty crystallizing in her chest. She knew something, a memory from her childhood, her grandmother's voice, a remedy so simple the learned doctors would never consider it. Her heart began to pound. She was a maid. She was nobody. But Lord William was dying, and nobody else had an answer. The question that would change everything formed in her mind. Did she dare? The morning of the 8th day dawned grey and oppressive, the August heat pressing down on Thornfield Manor like a suffocating blanket. Beatrice had not slept, her mind wrestling with impossible calculations. To speak would be to violate every rule of her station. Servants did not address the family directly, did not offer opinions, certainly did not contradict the collective wisdom of 20 distinguished physicians. Yet the alternative was to remain silent while a young man died, to carry forever the knowledge that she might have helped but lacked the courage to try. At 6 o'clock, she made her decision. Her hands trembled as she removed her apron, smoothed her plain grey dress, and climbed the servants' stairs to the main floor. The house was eerily quiet, the usual morning bustle suspended in the pall of impending death. She found Mrs. Crawford in the linen room, counting sheets with mechanical precision, her face haggard from sleepless nights. "Mrs. Crawford," Beatrice began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to speak with the Duke." The housekeeper's head snapped up, her expression transforming from exhaustion to shock to outrage in rapid succession. "Have you lost your senses, girl? The Duke? You? It's about Lord William. I know something that might help." "You know something?" Mrs. Crawford's voice dripped with incredulous scorn. 20 of the finest doctors in England have attended him, and you, a housemaid, presume to know better? She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "This is madness, Beatrice. You'll be dismissed without a character reference. You'll never work in a decent house again." "He's dying," Beatrice said simply. "What I know cannot make it worse. You will return to your duties immediately, or I will have you removed from this house within the hour." But Beatrice had crossed some internal threshold. She turned and walked toward the main staircase, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst from her chest. Behind her, Mrs. Crawford's shocked gasp was followed by rapid footsteps. The housekeeper seized her arm with surprising strength. "Stop this instant!" Their struggle in the hallway attracted attention. Mr. Pemberton emerged from the breakfast room, his eyebrows rising at the unprecedented scene. 2 footmen appeared from the dining room. Lady Charlotte descended the stairs, her morning dress immaculate, her expression one of haughty curiosity. The commotion drew more servants, more family members, until a small crowd had gathered in the grand entrance hall, all staring at the housemaid who had apparently gone mad. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?" The Duke's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He stood at the top of the staircase, his face ravaged by grief and sleeplessness, his legendary composure hanging by a thread. The Duchess appeared beside him, her hand at her throat. Mrs. Crawford immediately released Beatrice and dropped into a curtsy. "Your Grace, I apologize profoundly. This girl has taken leave of her senses. She will be dismissed immediately." "I can help, Lord William." Beatrice's voice rang out clear and strong, surprising even herself. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence, every eye fixed upon her. She felt the weight of their collective disbelief, their shock at her audacity, but she forced herself to continue. "I know a remedy. Please, Your Grace, let me try." The Duke descended 3 steps, his face darkening. "You? A maid?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "My son is attended by the finest medical minds in the realm, and you dare to suggest—" "They have failed," Beatrice interrupted, committing what she knew was an unforgivable breach. Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but they have failed. Lord William is dying. What harm can come from one more attempt?" "The harm," Lady Charlotte interjected coldly, gliding forward with serpentine grace, "is allowing an ignorant servant girl to experiment on the future Duke of Thornfield. It is grotesque. She should be whipped for her impertinence. My son is not a subject for experimentation by the lower classes," the Duchess added, her voice trembling with fury and fear. "This is intolerable." Dr. Hartwell, who had spent the night in attendance, appeared from the sick-room corridor. His face was grey with exhaustion and defeat. "Your Grace, I must concur with Her Grace. The young lord's condition is beyond hope. To allow some folk remedy at this stage would be not only futile but undignified." "What is your remedy?" The question came from the Duke himself. He had descended another step, and something in his eyes, some desperate flicker of a drowning man grasping at any floating debris, gave Beatrice courage. "Willow bark tea, Your Grace. Very strong, with honey and a compress of cool water changed every 5 minutes. My grandmother was a healer in her village. I saw her break fevers that doctors could not touch." The silence that followed was crushing. Then laughter erupted, harsh and mocking. Lady Charlotte's musical laugh led the chorus, joined by nervous titters from the servants and a derisive snort from Dr. Hartwell. "Willow bark?" the doctor said, shaking his head. "A peasant remedy. Your Grace, this is precisely the sort of ignorant superstition that—" "Enough!" The Duke's single word silenced everyone. He stared at Beatrice with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You would stake your position, your future employment, on this remedy." "I would stake anything, Your Grace. I believe it will work." "She believes," Lady Charlotte said with venomous sweetness. "How charming. Your Grace, surely you cannot seriously consider—" "Be silent, Charlotte." The Duke's command shocked everyone, including his future daughter-in-law. He turned to Dr. Hartwell. "You said yourself there is nothing more to be done, that we should prepare for the worst." "Yes, Your Grace, but—" "Then what harm can she do that death has not already promised?" The Duke looked at Beatrice again, and she saw in his face the terrible calculation of a father with nothing left to lose. "You have 1 hour, girl. If my son worsens, you will be arrested for attempted murder. If he shows no improvement, you will be dismissed and blacklisted from service in every house in England. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Then proceed. God help you if you fail." Beatrice curtsied and turned toward the kitchens, her legs barely supporting her. Behind her, the whispers exploded like gunfire. She heard Lady Charlotte's outraged protest, Mrs. Crawford's mortified apologies, the servants' shocked murmurs. She had just committed social suicide. If this failed, she would be ruined, her family would suffer, and she would carry the blame for a nobleman's death. But she did not hesitate. In the kitchen, she gathered what she needed: dried willow bark from the herb stores, honey, clean linen, and a basin of cold water. Cook watched in stunned silence as Beatrice prepared the tea, her hands steady despite her racing heart. 20 minutes later, she entered Lord William's chamber, a space she had never been permitted to enter before. The room was stifling, heavy with the smell of sickness and expensive cologne meant to mask it. The young lord lay unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid, his skin burning to the touch. The Duke, Duchess, Dr. Hartwell and Lady Charlotte stood against the walls like judges at an execution. Beatrice approached the bed, lifted Lord William's head with surprising gentleness, and coaxed the tea between his lips. She applied the cool compress to his forehead, changed it, applied another. The room was silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock. 1 minute passed. 2, 5, 10. Nothing changed. Lady Charlotte's smile grew triumphant. Dr. Hartwell checked his pocket watch with grim satisfaction. The Duchess closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Beatrice continued her ministrations, her faith wavering, but her hands steady. 15 minutes. 20. The Duke's expression hardened into something terrible. Then, at 23 minutes, Lord William's breathing changed, deepened, slowed, his eyelids fluttered. At 25 minutes, his eyes opened, confused but clear. At 30 minutes, the fever broke in a cascade of sweat that soaked the bedclothes. At 35 minutes, he spoke, his voice weak but coherent. "Father, what happened?" The room erupted. The Duchess collapsed to her knees beside the bed, sobbing. The Duke stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, relief, and something else, something Beatrice could not name. "Doctor." Hartwell rushed forward to examine his patient, his hands shaking. Lady Charlotte's triumphant smile had vanished, replaced by an expression of pure shock. And Beatrice, the housemaid who had dared everything, stood quietly in the corner, knowing that her life had just changed in ways she could not begin to imagine. The immediate aftermath of Lord William's miraculous recovery was chaos. Dr. Hartwell, recovering from his shock, immediately began examining the willow bark preparation with newfound respect, muttering about salicylic compounds and fever reduction. The Duchess, still weeping, had kissed Beatrice's hands before the Duke gently led her from the room. Lady Charlotte had departed without a word, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. And Beatrice, suddenly the centre of unprecedented attention, had been dismissed to the servants' quarters while the family absorbed what had occurred. She expected dismissal, despite her success. She had violated too many protocols, challenged too much authority. But 3 hours later, Mr. Pemberton summoned her to the Duke's study, his expression unreadable. She entered the wood-panelled sanctuary of masculine power with her heart in her throat, curtsying before the massive desk where the Duke sat, his fingers steepled, his eyes fixed upon her with disconcerting intensity. "You saved my son's life," he said without preamble. 20 distinguished physicians could not do what you accomplished with a peasant remedy and remarkable courage. He paused, and Beatrice saw the struggle in his face, the collision between gratitude and the rigid social order he had spent his life upholding. "I find myself in an impossible position. I owe you a debt I cannot repay, yet you are a housemaid who grossly overstepped her station. Society would expect me to dismiss you despite your success, to maintain proper boundaries." "I understand, Your Grace," Beatrice said quietly. "I accept whatever consequence you deem appropriate." "Do you?" The Duke rose and walked to the window, his back to her. "I wonder, you risked everything on your conviction. That speaks to a character rarely found in any class." He turned to face her. "My sister, Lady Agatha Thornfield, resides in London. She is a widow, eccentric by society's standards, and operates a salon that attracts intellectuals, reformers, and other unconventional sorts. She has been requesting that I send her a companion, someone intelligent and capable." I'm sending you to her, Beatrice Ashford, not as a maid, but as a lady's companion. Your wages will be £30 annually, and you will be provided appropriate clothing and education in the social graces you will need for the position." Beatrice stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "Your Grace, I cannot. I am not suitable for such a position. You saved my son when the finest minds in England could not. You are eminently suitable." His expression softened slightly. "This is not entirely altruism. Keeping you here would create impossible complications. Lady Charlotte has already made her displeasure known, and the servants' hierarchy has been disrupted beyond repair. You need a fresh start, and my sister needs someone with your particular combination of intelligence and courage. You will leave for London in 3 days." The next 72 hours passed in a blur. Beatrice was moved from the attic to a guest room, measured for new dresses, and given a crash course in deportment by a bemused Mrs. Crawford, who seemed unable to decide whether to congratulate or condemn her. The other servants treated her with a mixture of awe and resentment. No longer one of them, but not yet anything else. She was permitted to visit her mother and brother, delivering the astonishing news and a purse of money the Duke had provided. Her mother wept with relief and pride, while her brother stared at her as if she had sprouted wings. Lord William, recovering rapidly, had requested to see her. She was escorted to his chamber, now filled with flowers and sunshine, where he sat propped against pillows, still pale but unmistakably alive. Lady Charlotte sat beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Miss Ashford," Lord William said, and the use of Miss, rather than simply Beatrice or girl, was jarring. "I am told I owe you my life. I remember very little of my illness, but I am profoundly grateful." "I am glad you are recovered, my lord," Beatrice replied, curtsying. "My father tells me you are going to London, to my aunt's household. I think you will find her quite remarkable. She is nothing like the rest of our family." His smile was genuine, warm, and Beatrice felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that she immediately suppressed. He was engaged, a nobleman, and forever beyond her reach, regardless of her new position. "I am sure I will be most fortunate in her service," Beatrice said carefully. "Service?" Lady Charlotte's voice was honey over steel. "How quaint, though I suppose one can take the girl from the scullery, but never quite remove the scullery from the girl." Her smile was radiant and cruel. "I do hope London society will not be too overwhelming for you, Miss Ashford. It can be quite unforgiving to those who do not belong." Beatrice met her gaze steadily. "I am certain I will manage, Lady Charlotte. After all, I have survived far more challenging circumstances than a drawing room." The barb landed. Lady Charlotte's smile froze, and Lord William coughed to cover what might have been a laugh. Beatrice curtsied again and withdrew, her heart pounding. She had just made an enemy of the future Duchess of Thornfield, but she found she did not care. A new world was opening before her, and she was walking toward it with her head high. The journey to London was her first time in a proper carriage, her first time travelling more than 10 miles from her birthplace. She watched the countryside give way to increasingly dense settlements, then to the overwhelming sprawl of the capital itself. The noise, the crowds, the sheer scale of it all was both terrifying and exhilarating. Lady Agatha's townhouse in Bloomsbury was elegant, but smaller than Thornfield Manor, its interior decorated with an eclectic mix of art and artifacts that suggested a mind more interested in substance than status. Lady Agatha herself was a revelation. At 52, she was handsome rather than beautiful, with intelligent dark eyes, silver-streaked hair worn in a simple chignon, and a direct manner that immediately put Beatrice at ease. She greeted her new companion in the drawing-room, waving away formalities. "So you are the miracle worker who saved my nephew and scandalized my brother's household in one morning," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Splendid. I have no use for timid women or those who accept the world as it is handed to them. We shall get along famously." She gestured to a chair, Sit, child, tell me everything, and do not edit for propriety. I despise edited versions. Over tea, Beatrice found herself telling her story to this remarkable woman who listened with complete attention and asked penetrating questions. When she finished, Lady Agatha nodded thoughtfully. "You have a mind, Miss Ashford, and that is both a gift and a burden for a woman in our society. But here in my home, your mind will be valued. I host a salon every Thursday evening. Intellectuals, reformers, writers, physicians who actually think rather than simply recite what they were taught. You will attend, you will listen, and eventually you will contribute. I suspect you will find it illuminating." The first Thursday salon was indeed illuminating and overwhelming. Beatrice, dressed in one of her new gowns, a simple but elegant dove-grey silk, stood near the wall and watched as Lady Agatha's drawing room filled with the most unconventional gatherings she could have imagined. There were women who spoke as freely as men who listened to those women with respect, discussions of social reform, medical advances, and political philosophy that would have been unthinkable at Thornfield Manor. And there, engaged in animated discussion with Lady Agatha, was a man who would change everything. Dr. Elias Reed was 31, a physician who had studied in Edinburgh and Vienna, and who had recently returned from working in the London slums. He was tall and lean, with unruly dark hair, intelligent hazel eyes, and a passion for medical reform that animated his every word. When Lady Agatha introduced them, mentioning Beatrice's willowbark cure, his eyes lit with genuine interest. "Willowbark," he said thoughtfully. "The active compound is being studied on the continent. You may have stumbled upon something that will revolutionize fever treatment. Tell me, Miss Ashford, what else did your grandmother teach you?" And Beatrice, for the first time in her life, found herself in conversation with a man who valued her knowledge rather than dismissing it, who asked her opinion rather than telling her what to think. The evening flew by in a cascade of ideas and possibilities. When Dr. Reed departed, he asked permission to call again, specifically to continue their discussion. Lady Agatha granted it with a knowing smile. As Beatrice prepared for bed that night in her comfortable room, so different from the attic at Thornfield, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival that had sustained her through years of service, but something brighter and more dangerous. The hope that her life might hold possibilities she had never dared to imagine. 3 months in London had transformed Beatrice in ways both visible and profound. Under Lady Agatha's tutelage, she had acquired the polish of a lady's companion while retaining the directness that made her remarkable. She read voraciously from Lady Agatha's extensive library, attended lectures on subjects ranging from medical science to social reform, and became a valued participant in the Thursday salons rather than a silent observer. Her intelligence, no longer forced into hiding, flourished in the stimulating environment Lady Agatha cultivated. Dr. Elias Reed had become a regular visitor to the Bloomsbury townhouse, ostensibly to discuss medical matters with Lady Agatha, but increasingly to engage with Beatrice. Their conversations ranged across medicine, philosophy, and social justice, and Beatrice found in him a kindred spirit, someone who saw beyond class to the person beneath. He treated her as an intellectual equal, asked her opinions on his work in the slums, and shared his dreams of reforming medical education to include traditional remedies alongside modern science. "You represent something important, Miss Ashford," he told her one afternoon as they walked in the nearby square, Lady Agatha's maid trailing at a discreet distance as propriety demanded. "The wisdom of ordinary people, tested through generations, dismissed by the medical establishment because it does not come from universities or laboratories. Your grandmother's knowledge saved a life that 20 educated physicians could not. That should tell us something about the limits of our current approach." "You are unusual among your profession, Dr. Reed," Beatrice replied, pulling her cloak closer against the November chill. Most physicians would be offended by the suggestion that a village healer might know something they do not. Most physicians are fools, he said bluntly, then smiled. Present company excluded, of course. But yes, we are trained to dismiss anything that does not fit our narrow paradigm. It is intellectual cowardice masquerading as scientific rigor. He paused, then added more quietly, "You challenge me, Miss Ashford. You make me question assumptions I did not know I held. It is refreshing." Their relationship, whatever it was becoming, existed in a careful space between propriety and possibility. He had not declared himself, and Beatrice did not allow herself to hope for such a declaration. Yet there was something growing between them, acknowledged in glances and careful words, a connection that felt both inevitable and impossible. The delicate balance of her new life was disrupted in early December, when Lady Agatha announced they would attend the Cavendish Ball, one of the season's premier social events. "It is time you were properly introduced to society," she declared. "You cannot hide in Bloomsbury forever, my dear. Besides, my nephew William will be there with that dreadful Charlotte creature, and I want him to see what you have become." Beatrice's stomach knotted at the thought of facing Lord William and Lady Charlotte again, but she could not refuse. Lady Agatha commissioned a gown for her, a stunning creation in deep emerald silk that transformed her from companion to something approaching a lady. When she descended the stairs on the evening of the ball, Dr. Reed, who was escorting them, stopped mid-sentence and stared. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly, "you are beautiful." Anear the Cavendish mansion blazed with light, its ballroom filled with the cream of London society. Beatrice entered on Lady Agatha's arm, her heart pounding, acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Lady Agatha, utterly unconcerned with social opinion, swept through the crowd greeting acquaintances and introducing Beatrice with casual authority that brooked no condescension. Then Beatrice saw them. Lord William and Lady Charlotte stood near the orchestra, the perfect aristocratic couple. He was handsome in his evening clothes, his health fully restored, his bearing confident. Lady Charlotte was resplendent in white silk and diamonds, her beauty undeniable, her hand possessively on William's arm. As if sensing Beatrice's gaze, Charlotte looked up, and their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. Recognition flared, followed by something cold and calculating. "Aunt Agatha!" Lord William had spotted them and was approaching with Charlotte in tow. His smile was genuine as he greeted his aunt, then turned to Beatrice. "Miss Ashford, what a pleasure to see you again. London clearly agrees with you. You look remarkably well." "Thank you, Lord William. I'm glad to see you in such excellent health." "Thanks to you," he said warmly. "I have not forgotten my debt to you." "How touching," Lady Charlotte interjected, her smile brilliant and false. "The grateful patient and his saviour. Though I must say, Miss Ashford, you have risen quite remarkably from your former position. One might almost forget you were scrubbing floors mere months ago." The words were delivered with such sweet venom that several nearby conversations paused. "One might," Beatrice replied calmly, "if one measured a person's worth by their occupation rather than their character. But I suppose different people have different standards." And Lady Charlotte's eyes flashed dangerously. Before she could respond, Dr. Reed appeared at Beatrice's side, offering his arm. "Miss Ashford, I believe this is our dance." As they moved onto the floor, Beatrice was intensely aware of the eyes following them, the whispers spreading through the crowd. Dr. Reed was an excellent dancer, and she had learned enough from Lady Agatha's instruction to follow competently. "That was magnificently done," he murmured as they waltzed. "Lady Charlotte is a viper, and you handled her perfectly." "I may have made things worse," Beatrice said, troubled. "She will not forgive that." "She was never going to forgive your existence," Dr. Reed countered. "You saved her fiancé's life, which should have been her role. You succeeded where she was useless. Women like Charlotte Pemberton cannot tolerate being shown up by anyone, least of all someone they consider beneath them." The evening progressed with increasing tension. Lady Charlotte made several more pointed comments within Beatrice's hearing, each designed to remind everyone of Beatrice's origins. But Lady Agatha's formidable presence and Dr. Reed's attentive support provided a buffer. More significantly, Beatrice noticed that Lord William seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his fiancée's behaviour, his expression growing troubled each time Charlotte launched another barb. The confrontation came in the refreshment room. Beatrice had stepped away briefly and found herself face to face with Charlotte, who had clearly been waiting for such an opportunity. "You think you have escaped your place," Charlotte hissed, her beautiful face twisted with malice. "You think, because Lady Agatha has dressed you up and taught you to curtsy properly, that you are anything other than a servant? You are nothing, Miss Ashford. A temporary curiosity. When William and I are married, I will ensure you are reminded of exactly what you are." "And what am I, Lady Charlotte?" Beatrice asked quietly. "Someone who saved a life? Someone who dared to act when others stood paralyzed? Someone who values knowledge over status?" She stepped closer, her voice steady. "You are afraid of me, not because of what I was, but because of what I represent. The possibility that birth and title are not the only measures of worth. That terrifies you because without your father's title and your pretty face, what are you?" Charlotte's hand flew up to slap her, but Beatrice caught her wrist with surprising strength. "Do not," she said softly. "You will only embarrass yourself further." "Is there a problem here?" Lord William's voice cut through the tension. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on Charlotte's raised hand and Beatrice's restraining grip. "No problem at all, my lord," Beatrice said, releasing Charlotte and stepping back. "Lady Charlotte and I were simply having a frank discussion. I believe we understand each other perfectly now." She curtsied to them both and walked past William, her head high, her hands trembling only slightly. She found Dr. Reed and Lady Agatha in the ballroom. "I think it is time we departed," she said quietly. Lady Agatha took one look at her face and nodded. As their carriage rolled through the London streets, Lady Agatha patted Beatrice's hand. "You handled that beautifully, my dear. Charlotte showed her true nature, and William saw it. I know my nephew. He is not a fool, and he is not blind. Seeds of doubt have been planted. I do not wish to cause trouble between them," Beatrice said. "You did not cause anything," Dr. Reed said firmly. "You simply existed, and that was enough to reveal what Lady Charlotte truly is. But Miss Ashford, I must speak plainly. I had intended to wait to court you properly over time, but tonight made me realize that time is a luxury we may not have. I am not a wealthy man. I have my practice and my work, but no title, no estate. What I do have is profound respect for you, admiration for your courage and intelligence, and feelings that have grown far beyond professional regard." He took a deep breath. "I am asking if you would consider allowing me to court you with the intention of marriage. I know it is sudden, but I have never been more certain of anything." Beatrice stared at him, her heart racing. Lady Agatha was smiling broadly. Beatrice began, then found her voice. "Yes, Dr. Reed. Yes, I would be honored." "Splendid," Lady Agatha declared. "Now we can truly give society something to talk about." As the carriage continued through the night, Beatrice looked out at the gas-lit streets of London and felt the future opening before her like a door to a room filled with light. She had walked through fire and emerged transformed, and she was no longer afraid. The announcement of Dr. Elias Reed's courtship of Miss Beatrice Ashford created exactly the scandal Lady Agatha had anticipated with such glee. Within days, every drawing room in London buzzed with the story. The housemaid who had saved a duke's son, been elevated to lady's companion, and now captured the attention of a respected physician. Opinions divided sharply. Reformers and progressives celebrated it as evidence of changing times. Traditionalists condemned it as the collapse of proper social order. And at Thornfield Manor, the news was received with reactions that would reshape multiple destinies. The Duke, upon hearing the news from his sister's gleeful letter, sat in his study for a long time, staring at nothing. He had given Beatrice a chance at a better life, but he had not anticipated this. A physician was respectable, educated, but not titled. The match was unconventional but not scandalous, assuming one overlooked Beatrice's origins. He found himself oddly pleased, though he could not have explained why. The girl had saved his son and shown remarkable courage. She deserved happiness. Lord William's reaction was more complex. When Lady Charlotte read him the news from a society gossip column, her voice dripping with scorn, he felt something unexpected twist in his chest. He remembered Beatrice's grey eyes, her quiet dignity, the way she had risked everything to save him. He had thought of her often during his recovery, wondered about her life in London, felt guilty that his gratitude had been expressed so inadequately. Now she was to marry, and the thought disturbed him in ways he could not name. Charlotte's vicious commentary about servants who do not know their place and physicians who should marry within their class only increased his discomfort. "She saved my life, Charlotte," he said quietly, interrupting her tirade. "Perhaps we might show some generosity." Generosity? Charlotte's beautiful face hardened. She is a social climber who took advantage of a fortunate accident, and now she has ensnared some foolish doctor. It is pathetic, William. I hope you are not going to suggest we acknowledge this farce. "I suggest we remember Christian charity and basic decency," William replied, his tone sharper than he intended. Beatrice Ashford showed more courage in one morning than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. She deserves our respect, not your contempt. The argument that followed was their first serious conflict, and it revealed fissures in their relationship that William had been carefully ignoring. Charlotte's cruelty, which he had dismissed as high spirits or social sophistication, now appeared in a harsher light. Her obsession with status and appearance, her casual dismissal of anyone she deemed inferior, her lack of compassion, all of it suddenly seemed less charming and more troubling. They parted coldly, and William found himself riding across the estate, trying to clear his head. In London, Beatrice's life had taken on a dreamlike quality. Dr. Reed courted her with a combination of intellectual engagement and genuine affection that she had never imagined possible. They attended lectures together, walked in parks, discussing everything from medical ethics to social reform, and slowly built a foundation of mutual respect and growing love. He introduced her to his colleagues, and while some were skeptical of her background, most were won over by her intelligence and the remarkable story of Lord William's cure. Lady Agatha supervised the courtship with benevolent authority, ensuring propriety while encouraging the relationship. "You are good for each other," she told Beatrice one evening. "Elias needs someone who challenges his assumptions and shares his passion for helping people. And you need someone who values your mind as much as your heart. It is a rare combination, my dear. Do not let society's narrow-mindedness make you doubt it." 3 months into the courtship, Dr. Reed proposed formally in Lady Agatha's drawing room, with her ladyship beaming from her chair like a proud mother. The ring was simple, a small sapphire that had belonged to his mother, and Beatrice accepted with tears streaming down her face. They planned a modest wedding for the spring, to be held in a Bloomsbury church, with a small reception at Lady Agatha's townhouse. The invitation list became a political statement. Lady Agatha insisted on inviting her brother, the Duke, and his family, including Lord William and Lady Charlotte. "They should see what you have become," she declared, "and William should see what genuine affection looks like, as opposed to the mercenary arrangement he has entangled himself in." To everyone's surprise, the Duke accepted, bringing his wife, but notably not requiring Lord William's attendance. William, however, chose to come, over Charlotte's furious objections. Their relationship had deteriorated significantly since the announcement of Beatrice's engagement, with William increasingly questioning whether he truly knew the woman he was to marry. Charlotte's ultimatum, "If you attend that servant's wedding, you are choosing her over me," backfired spectacularly. William attended. The wedding day arrived with spring sunshine and the scent of cherry blossoms. The small church was filled with an eclectic mix of guests: Lady Agatha's intellectual circle, Dr. Reed's medical colleagues, a few progressive aristocrats, and Beatrice's mother and brother, dressed in their finest and overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. Beatrice wore a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk, her auburn hair crowned with orange blossoms, her face radiant with happiness. As she walked down the aisle on the Duke's arm, a gesture he had insisted upon, saying he owed her that much, she saw Dr. Reed waiting at the altar, his eyes shining with love and pride. She saw Lady Agatha dabbing at tears. She saw her mother weeping openly, and she saw Lord William standing at the back of the church, his expression complex and troubled, watching her with an intensity that made her falter for a moment before she recovered and continued forward. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. When Dr. Reed, now her husband, kissed her, the small congregation erupted in applause. At the reception, the Duke made a toast that shocked everyone. To Miss Ashford, Mrs. Reed now, who taught this old aristocrat that courage and intelligence are not the exclusive province of any class. May your marriage be blessed with the same conviction that led you to save my son's life. Lord William approached her during the reception, while Elias was engaged in conversation with colleagues. "Mrs. Reed," he said formally, then smiled. "That will take some getting used to. I wanted to congratulate you personally and to thank you again, not just for saving my life, but for showing me that there are different kinds of courage, different measures of worth than the ones I was raised to value." "You honor me, Lord William," Beatrice replied. "I hope you find happiness in your own marriage." His smile faded slightly. "Yes, well, I hope so too." He paused, seeming to struggle with something, then said quietly, "Charlotte and I have postponed our wedding indefinitely. We find we do not suit as well as we thought. I suspect you are not surprised." Beatrice met his eyes and saw pain there, and confusion, and something else she could not name. "I am sorry if you are hurting," she said gently. "But I think you are wise to be certain before making such a commitment. You deserve to be truly happy, not merely suitably matched." "As do you," he said, "and I think you have found that happiness. Dr. Reed is a fortunate man." He bowed and withdrew, leaving Beatrice with a strange mixture of emotions she did not have time to examine before Elias reclaimed her for another round of congratulations. The reception ended in the late afternoon, and Beatrice and Elias departed for a brief wedding trip to the countryside. As their carriage rolled through London streets, Beatrice leaned against her husband's shoulder and felt the weight of her old life finally lifting. She had been a housemaid, invisible and powerless. She had become a companion, educated and valued. Now she was a physician's wife, a partner in a marriage of equals, with a future limited only by her own courage and imagination. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, kissing the top of her head. "That I am impossibly happy," Beatrice replied, "and that I cannot wait to see what we will build together." "We will build something remarkable," he promised. "A life of purpose and passion. You and I, changing the world one patient, one idea, one courageous act at a time." As the carriage carried them toward their future, Beatrice looked back at the city that had transformed her and felt nothing but gratitude. She had dared to step beyond her place, and the world had opened before her. She was no longer afraid. She was free. 18 months after her wedding, Beatrice Reed stood in the clinic she and Elias had established in Whitechapel, one of London's poorest districts, and surveyed their work with profound satisfaction. The clinic occupied a converted warehouse, its walls freshly painted, its examination rooms equipped with both modern medical instruments and carefully labeled jars of traditional remedies. A sign above the door read, "Reed Medical Clinic, Modern Science and Traditional Wisdom," a motto that had become their guiding principle. The clinic served those who could not afford conventional physicians, charging fees on a sliding scale that meant many patients paid nothing at all. Beatrice had become an integral part of the operation, not as a nurse, but as a medical researcher in her own right. She had spent months documenting her grandmother's remedies, testing them systematically, and publishing papers with Elias on the efficacy of traditional treatments. Their work had attracted attention from progressive medical circles and scorn from conservative ones, but the results spoke for themselves. Their patients recovered at rates that rivaled or exceeded those of expensive private practices. Beatrice had also become a lecturer, invited to speak at medical schools and reform societies about the value of folk medicine and the importance of listening to patients regardless of their class. Her presentations were always packed, partly because of her remarkable story, but increasingly because of the quality of her research and the passion of her advocacy. She had found her calling, and it filled her with a sense of purpose she had never imagined possible. Their personal life was equally fulfilling. She and Elias lived in a modest but comfortable house near the clinic, their home filled with books, medical journals, and the lively conversation of the intellectuals and reformers who gathered there regularly. Lady Agatha was a frequent visitor, delighting in her protégé's success and taking credit for it with shameless pride. Beatrice's mother and brother had been relocated to a small cottage near London, her brother now apprenticed to a printer, their lives transformed by Beatrice's rise. On a crisp October morning, Beatrice was examining a child with a persistent cough when the clinic door opened and an unexpected visitor entered. Lord William Thornfield stood in the waiting room, looking distinctly out of place among the working-class patients in his fine coat and polished boots. Beatrice, startled, quickly finished with her patient and approached him. "Lord William, this is a surprise. Is something wrong? Are you ill?" "No, nothing like that," he assured her quickly. "I apologize for appearing without notice. I was in London and wanted to see your clinic. I have read about your work in the medical journals. It is quite remarkable." Beatrice gave him a tour, showing him the examination rooms, the dispensary where they prepared both modern medicines and traditional remedies, the small library where patients could wait in comfort. William listened attentively, asked intelligent questions, and seemed genuinely impressed. When they finished, she invited him to her small office for tea. "You have built something extraordinary here," William said, accepting a cup. "You and Dr. Reed are changing lives, challenging the medical establishment, proving that compassion and innovation can coexist. I am in awe of what you have accomplished." "Thank you," Beatrice replied. "But I sense you did not come here simply to tour a clinic. What is really on your mind, Lord William?" He smiled ruefully. "You always did see through pretense. Very well. I wanted to tell you that I have broken my engagement to Charlotte permanently. It should have been done long ago, but I was a coward, clinging to what was expected rather than what was right. Seeing you at your wedding, seeing what genuine partnership and shared purpose looked like, made me realize what a hollow mockery my own engagement was." "I am sorry you were hurt," Beatrice said gently, "but I think you made the right choice. You deserve more than a marriage of convenience and social advantage." "I'm beginning to understand that," William agreed. "I'm also beginning to understand that the world my father raised me to inherit is changing, and I can either resist that change or help shape it. I want to help shape it. I am establishing a foundation to support medical clinics like yours, to fund research into traditional remedies, to provide education for promising students regardless of their class. I want to use my privilege for something meaningful." He paused, then added quietly, "You inspired that, Beatrice. You showed me that courage is not about maintaining the status quo, but about challenging it when it is unjust." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "That is wonderful, William. Truly. The world needs more people like you, willing to use their advantages to lift others up. I also wanted to apologize," he continued, "for not defending you more strongly against Charlotte's cruelty, for not recognizing sooner what kind of person she was, for not thanking you adequately for saving my life. You gave me a second chance at living, and I nearly wasted it on a life that would have made me miserable. I will not make that mistake again. They talked for another hour, and Beatrice was struck by how much William had changed. The arrogant certainty of his class had been replaced by thoughtful questioning. The automatic assumption of superiority had given way to genuine curiosity about different perspectives. He had grown, and she found herself genuinely glad for him. After he left, Elias emerged from an examination room and slipped his arm around her waist. "Was that Lord William Thornfield I saw leaving?" "It was," Beatrice confirmed. "He came to see the clinic and to tell me he has broken his engagement. He is establishing a foundation to support work like ours." "Good for him," Elias said. "It takes courage to break from one's expected path. You would know something about that." He kissed her temple. "Come, Mrs. Reed, we have a lecture to prepare for tomorrow, and I need your insights on the willow bark paper." As they walked back into the clinic together, Beatrice reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. She had been a housemaid, invisible and powerless, her potential buried under the weight of class and circumstance. One moment of courage, one decision to speak when silence was expected, had changed everything. She had saved a life, and in doing so, had saved her own. The news from Thornfield Manor, which reached her through Lady Agatha's letters, suggested that Charlotte Pemberton had quickly attached herself to another titled gentleman, this one older and wealthier, if less handsome than William. The match was celebrated in society columns as brilliant, though Lady Agatha's acerbic commentary suggested it was more mercenary than romantic. Charlotte would have her title and her status, but Beatrice suspected she would never have happiness, because happiness required a capacity for genuine feeling that Charlotte had never possessed. As for William, Lady Agatha reported that he had become something of a reformer himself, much to his father's bemusement and his mother's pride. He was using his position in the House of Lords to advocate for medical reform and workers' rights, earning both praise and criticism from his peers. He had not yet remarried, but Lady Agatha was confident he would eventually find someone worthy of him, someone who valued substance over status. 6 months later, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her and Elias with joy and a touch of anxiety about balancing their work with parenthood. But they were determined to build a family as unconventional and purposeful as their marriage, to raise children who understood that worth was measured in character and courage, not birth and title. On the evening she shared the news with Lady Agatha, the older woman embraced her with tears in her eyes. "You have become everything I hoped for you, and more," she said. "You took the chance I gave you and built something magnificent. You are proof that talent and determination can overcome any obstacle, that the accident of birth need not define one's destiny. I am so very proud of you, my dear." As Beatrice walked home that evening through the gaslit streets of London, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, she thought about the child she would bring into the world. That child would grow up knowing that their mother had been a housemaid who dared to challenge dukes and doctors, who had saved a life and built a new one, who had refused to accept the limitations society tried to impose. That child would learn that courage and compassion were the truest measures of nobility, that knowledge was power regardless of its source, and that the world could be changed by anyone brave enough to try. She had bloomed where she was planted, but more than that, she had transplanted herself to richer soil and grown beyond anyone's expectations, including her own. She was Beatrice Reed, physician's wife, medical researcher, advocate for the poor, and living proof that the human spirit could not be confined by class or circumstance. Her story had begun in a manor house attic, but it would end wherever her courage and conviction carried her, and she was no longer afraid of where that might be. The future stretched before her, full of challenges and possibilities, and she walked toward it with her head high and her heart full, knowing that she had earned every step of the journey and that the best was yet to come. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear which part resonated with you most and where in the world you're listening from. Your support helps these stories reach even more people. Thank you for being here.